Hi everyone, here's a question for you. When did the Roman era of Britain come to an end? Well, if you look online, you'll probably find lots of sources saying that the Roman era of Britain ended in the year 410, because that was when Emperor Honorius sent a letter to Britain telling them that they had to defend themselves from that point onwards, and that the Romans would no longer be able to defend them. So that marks the end of Roman Britain. However, there's a problem with this. Well, the problem is that it's all wrong, and in this video I'm going to explain why. So the record of Emperor Honorius sending a letter to Britain actually comes from just one source. We don't have the letter itself, we just have one source referencing him doing this. So the source is Zosimus, who was a late 5th, early 6th century Byzantine historian. So he refers to the fact that Honorius sent this letter, and what he actually says is that he sent this letter telling the cities of Britain to take up arms to defend themselves. He doesn't explicitly say that the Romans would no longer be able to defend them, but that is the implication. Otherwise, why would he have told them to take up arms to defend themselves? So that part makes sense. However, there's a problem with the understanding that he actually sent this to Britain. So, to give you a little bit of context about what was going on around this time in history, in the year 383, during the usurpation of Magnus Maximus, that usurper, Magnus Maximus, had withdrawn a large quantity of the Roman troops from Britain to go and attack the continent, to take over the Western Roman Empire. And then, in the year 407, a soldier called Constantine, known to historians as Constantine III, basically did the same thing, and it's believed that he took pretty much all the remaining troops from Britain to the continent. And then, just 2 years later, in 409, we learn from Zosimus, the same Byzantine historian who records the letter sent by Honorius, we learn from Zosimus, that in 409 the Britons became frustrated with the Romans because they weren't actually defending them, because they were still being attacked by barbarians. So the Britons expelled the Roman administration. So in reality, the year 409 marks the end of Roman Britain. But in addition to this little detail about which year marks the end of Roman Britain being wrong, in addition to that, this also has massive implications for understanding Zosimus' reference to Honorius' letter. Because think about it. So the context of the passage in which this letter is mentioned is that Alaric, a Visigoth leader, was attacking northern Italy. So then, in that very passage, we find the reference to Honorius sending this letter to the Britons telling them to defend themselves. So, was Britain under any threat from Alaric? Well, no. I mean, northern Italy is hundreds and hundreds of miles away from Britain. There's no indication that Alaric was ever even going in that direction. He ended up just going right down into Italy, and during the years prior to 410, he had several times gone down as far as Rome. There's no indication that Britain was under any threat. However, let's consider the possibilities, okay? So there are two main possibilities in understanding this letter that was sent to Britain. So firstly, there's the possibility that Honorius was sending a letter to the Britons to let them know that there was going to be this attack, that they were under threat from Alaric. Now, obviously, that's incredibly unlikely that they would have been under threat from Alaric, but let's just suppose that maybe Honorius was being exceptionally cautious. Well, in the year prior to that, 409, the Britons had already expelled the Roman administration, so Britain was no longer under the administration of Rome. So why would the emperor send a letter warning a province that was no longer part of the empire, a province that had just recently declared its own independence? Why would the emperor do that? It makes no sense. It wasn't part of the Roman Empire, so who cares if it gets attacked by barbarians? Why would the emperor go to the effort of warning them about the possibility of Alaric attacking. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. A slightly more likely possibility is that the meaning of the letter was that he was telling them that they were going to withdraw their Roman troops so that they could go and fight against Alaric in northern Italy. That makes more sense. So he was letting the Britons know that from this point on they would have to defend themselves. However, that still doesn't make any sense, because by that point there were pretty much no troops left in Britain, because they'd all been taken by Magnus Maximus in 383 and then by Constantine III in 407. So by 410 there were no Roman troops to take. So that explanation doesn't work either. On the other hand, let's suppose that it wasn't sent to Britain at all, because there doesn't really seem to be any explanation involving Britain that actually makes sense. However, we know from several other ancient texts that an error which did occur sometimes was a confusion between Britain and the region of Bruttium or Bruttium in southern Italy. This was the southernmost part of Italy, the tip of the shoe of Italy. That whole region was called Bruttium. And in Greek, Britain is Britannia and Bruttium is Brettia. Very, very similar. Just a very minor mistake would be required to change one from the other. And we know from several other ancient texts that this did sometimes happen. For example, one writer referred to Attila the Hun withdrawing into Britain when he heard about a certain defeat that occurred in central Italy. Obviously that makes no sense in the context of actual Britain. It must be talking about Bruttium in southern Italy, as is universally understood in that passage. So in this passage in Zosimus about Alaric attacking northern Italy, and where he'd gone down as far as Rome several times, well, surely a location in Italy makes far more sense than a location in the northwest of Europe. But I've heard people say, well, this isn't an idea that's unique to me, by the way. In fact, this is even so popular and it's becoming so widely accepted that I noticed recently, if you go to the Encyclopedia Britannica online entry for Honorius, it actually states very explicitly, very directly, that he sent a letter to Bruttium telling them to defend themselves. It doesn't even mention the controversy between whether this was Bruttium or Britain. It just states it as a fact. That's how accepted this theory is becoming. So it's by no means a theory that's unique to me. However, I've seen some people criticize this theory on the basis that Bruttium, all the way down in southern Italy, was almost as far away from Alaric's attacks as Britain was. Because think, from North Italy, which was where Alaric was actually attacking most of the time, to Bruttium in southern Italy, the southernmost part of Italy, that's a long way away, almost as far as the distance between northern Italy and Britain. So I've seen some people say that it doesn't make any sense in this context either, because Bruttium wasn't under any threat from an attack from Alaric either, pretty much just as much as Britain wasn't. However, I think there's an explanation that makes sense. As far as I'm aware, I'm the first person to suggest this, but let me know if I'm not. I would be interested to see if other academics have made this point before. So there are two possible ways of understanding this, similar to the two possible ways of understanding it in the potential context of Britain. So the first is that Honorius was warning Bruttium that they were going to be attacked, but Rome was too preoccupied, so they weren't able to defend them. So he was warning Bruttium that, look, Alaric is probably going to attack you, but we're not in a position to defend you, so defend yourselves. But that doesn't make much sense because of the reason just mentioned, that Bruttium was a long way away from where Alaric was operating. However, there is another explanation, which I don't think anyone's mentioned before. So rather than assuming that he was telling them to defend themselves because they were inevitably going to be attacked, instead of that, perhaps he sent this message to tell them to take up arms to defend themselves, because he was going to withdraw the Roman troops from that territory to go and defend against Alaric in northern Italy. And in that context, actually, the distance between Bruttium and Alaric's attacks actually is perfectly consistent. It actually makes a lot of sense, because it would be logical to withdraw troops from the province which was furthest from danger, but still close enough that it would be realistic to actually get those troops and bring them to their relevant position in time to be useful. So, it couldn't be troops from a long way away, because that would just be impractical. But southern Italy, which was close-ish to northern Italy, but still a far distance from where Alaric was actually attacking, that would be the perfect place to take troops away to then go and support the fight in northern Italy. And so Honorius wasn't suggesting in his letter to Bruttium that they were about to be attacked, so they needed to defend themselves because the Romans weren't able to. That's not the point at all. His point was simply that they would be taking away the Roman troops, so from now on they'd have to defend themselves, at least for the time being. So that, I think, is an explanation which works a lot better than the usual explanation which is given in this context, which is merely that he was warning them that they were in danger, but he wasn't in a position to help. I don't think that makes sense. So I think my explanation is a good way of harmonizing the fact that Britain doesn't make any sense in this context, but at the same time, it might seem like Bruttium doesn't make much sense either. So I think my explanation harmonizes the evidence very well. Let me know what you think in the comments though. If you have an alternative explanation, then I'd love to hear it.